A very good morning to all of you, my dear students. This is Professor Vyas R. Murnal, Department of ECE, SDMCET, Dharwad. So for this semester, I'll be taking you the course on analog electronic devices and circuits. The subject code is 18U ECC 303. I'll be taking the course for both the divisions. So before we actually look at the syllabus of analog electronic devices and circuits, it will be really good for us to just revise some of the fundamentals which we had already studied in our basic electronics course. So the first two sessions will be just a revision session on the fundamentals of basic electronics. Before we really start, I would just like to tell you that this COVID-19 pandemic has forced us to go for new learning and teaching methodologies. So we'll have to really adapt to those changes, which we'll be doing it very successfully in this course. Okay, so in the basic electronics, you students had learnt about the diodes, the transistors, operational amplifiers, the feedback amplifiers, and also the oscillators. Okay, you had also learnt about some of the basic aspects of digital electronics also. Okay, so whenever we say about electronics, it all starts with active devices and the passive devices. Well, the term electronics itself says it's a branch of science. Well, it's actually an applied branch of science which deals with the study of the flow of electrons. Well, the first point that comes to our mind is, what's the difference between an active device and a passive device? Well, we have studied about resistors, capacitors, and also inductors. These come under passive devices. What about active devices? Transistors and the power sources, they come under active devices. Well, the slide clearly shows the symbols of active devices and also passive devices. Well, you just look at the pointer. So the pointer shows that, yes, okay, so that's the symbol for a resistor, inductor, and a capacitor. So all these three components belong to passive devices. Whereas on the left hand side, you can clearly observe that diode is an active device, transistor is also an active device, SCR, which stands for silicon controlled rectifier, is also an active device. Fine, but what's the basic difference between an active device and a passive device? Well, the standard definition goes like this: active devices or the components are the elements or devices which are capable of providing or delivering energy to the circuit, whereas passive components are the devices which do not require any external source for the operation, and these are capable of storing energy in the form of voltage or current in the circuit. Now, to put it in very simple words, passive devices, they behave in a passive way. What do we mean by that? They just store the energy, right? They cannot perform some very important functions like rectification, amplification, and so on. Whatever energy is available, they just store that energy. We know that a resistor opposes the flow of current. Inductor stores energy in the form of magnetic field. Capacitor stores energy in the form of electric field. Whereas active devices like diode, it can perform rectification. A transistor can perform amplification. Okay, so these are all active components which really provide energy to the circuit in which they are present. So the next slide shows you some of the real-time devices, active as well as passive devices. The first one is a resistor, okay, which has some sort of color codings. Most of the students, I believe, know how to just measure the resistance value of a resistor. Okay, the capacitor. In the capacitor we have ceramic capacitor, electrolytic capacitor. The one which is shown in the slide, it is an electrolytic capacitor. Then inductors. So all these three are passive devices. Then comes the diode. Well, there are many variants in the diode. Okay, so we have a separate chapter on this called two-terminal devices, wherein we will be studying in detail about various types of diodes. Although they are very fundamental, very simplistic, actively based electronic devices, but they have a lot of applications in the industry. So we will be looking at those things in a more detailed fashion in the coming chapters. Well, a transistor, yes, again there are many flavors in the transistor. So that's the IC, relay, and the last one is a battery. So this slide actually shows some of the commonly used active as well as passive devices. Next, a recap of some of the semiconductor fundamentals. Well, we can clearly differentiate the elements in three types: the conductors, semiconductors, and the insulators. Semiconductors are a special class of elements having their conductivity between that of a good conductor and that of an insulator. Well, we know that a good conductor conducts excellently. Insulator, there is absolutely no current flowing in an insulator. Okay. Just to give an example of a very good conductor, we can say gold, silver, aluminium, copper. They are all very good conductive elements. Insulators, wood, rubber, these are all excellent insulators which provide excellent insulation. Now the name semiconductor, its property lies between that of a good conductor and an insulator. Well, the semiconductor industry relies on three major semiconductors. The first one being silicon, second one is germanium, and the third one is gallium arsenide. Silicon is abundantly available in the nature, and it can form excellent oxide called as silicon dioxide. Due to these two reasons, silicon technology dominates over other semiconductors. Approximately we can say that silicon technology is almost, it occupies 80 to 90% of the semiconductor technology. Hardly 20% of the semiconductor technology is with germanium, gallium arsenide, and other compound semiconductors. Well, so very quickly we'll try to go through the bonding aspects involved in the semiconductors. Well, in our PUC first year and PUC second year, most of us will be studying about the various covalent bonds. The various bonds, ionic bond, covalent bond, nuclear bonds. Okay. So silicon always forms a covalent bond. If you just go through the atomic number of silicon, it is 14. And if you just split it, it's like, in the form of KLMN, it's like 2 electrons in the innermost shell, 8 electrons in the next shell, and finally 4 electrons in the final shell. Well, the outermost shell is called as valence shell. So the valency depends on the number of electrons that reside in the outermost shell. So for a silicon, there are 4 electrons residing in the outermost shell, due to which its valency is 4. Similarly, germanium, okay, you can very clearly see that in the outermost shell of the germanium, again there are 4 electrons. So the valency of germanium is also 4. If you just compare the atomic structure of silicon and germanium, what differences do we observe? Well, at the core we have nucleus, so that's the first shell, second shell, and the third shell. If you carefully observe, you can notice that the first shell has 2 electrons, second shell has 8 electrons, and the fourth shell, which is the outermost shell, has 4 electrons, thereby giving the valency as 4. Germanium has 1 extra shell, so this is the first one, second one, third one, and the fourth one. Okay, the formula that tells us the number of electrons which are residing in a particular shell is 2n square, where n stands for the shell. Alright, so the last one is the atomic structure of gallium as well as arsenic. Okay, well, gallium is a trivalent element, whereas arsenic is a pentavalent element. Both of them combine together to form a compound semiconductor called gallium arsenide. Okay, so this slide gives us some information about the covalent bonding involved in a silicon atom and also in a gallium arsenide crystals. Okay, so if you carefully observe, you can see that each and every silicon atom covalently bonds with 4 other silicon atoms. Okay, so let me consider the central silicon atom. So this particular silicon atom covalently shares itself one single electron with every other adjacent silicon atom. Okay, so 2 electrons combine together to form a bond. So you can very clearly observe that 4 adjacent silicon atoms are involved in covalent bonding with respect to a silicon atom. Okay, covalent bonds are strong in nature. Well, similar case also applies for a gallium arsenide, but the only difference is in the crystal structure. Okay. Yes, we may also have studied something about energy levels. The first diagram represents the discrete energy levels in an isolated atomic structure. Okay. Let us consider in general any atomic structure. If we start moving from the nucleus to the outermost energy shell, then we can say that the energy increases. Okay, but there is a gist here, which means if we want to particularly ionize any atom, then it makes sense and it is very easier to extract or to remove the outermost electrons that are present in the valence shell. It requires minimum amount of energy to remove the valence shell electrons, whereas if you want to remove the electrons which are present in the inner shells, it requires or it needs a lot of energy. Okay, so that means outermost valence electrons can be very easily removed from any atom as such. provided the gap is feasible, okay, which we usually call it as Eg, which represents the energy gap. All right, so let us look at the picture which is present at the bottom. So this slide, the diagram B, represents the conduction and the valence bands of an insulator, a semiconductor and a conductor. So the first one is the energy band gap of an insulator. Well, it can be clearly seen that the energy band gap, which is represented by the symbol Eg, is huge in the case of an insulator. Okay, so just look at the value. Eg is greater than 5 electron volts. Well, 5 electron volts is a pretty huge number. Okay, so if you just consider any insulator, if you provide some external energy, then the electrons which are residing in the valence band, they get slightly energized. However, they cannot move from the valence band and enter into the conduction band in the case of insulator. Okay, so for that reason it is being mentioned that unable to reach the conduction level. So in an insulator, electrons find it extremely hard to reach from valence band to the conduction band. Whereas in the case of a semiconductor, you can observe that the energy band gap is not that larger, that greater when compared to the insulator. Okay, it is still smaller, right? It is less when compared to an insulator. So whenever any external energy is applied, either in the form of voltage or light as such, the electrons that are residing in the valence band get energized and they immediately jump in the conduction band. Okay, so whenever any electrons transit or move from valence band into the conduction band, we say that current flows. So under normal circumstances, a semiconductor behaves as an insulator. However, at room temperature or when any or whenever any external energy is being supplied, the semiconductor, it actually becomes a conductor from an insulator. Okay, so that is why we give the term semiconductor to it. Next, well, the conductor, we know that the energy levels are mixed or overlapped. Okay, we usually say that the conduction band and the valence band are overlapped in the case of a conductor. Okay, so just to very quickly summarize, in an insulator the energy gap is extremely high, so there is absolutely no conduction. In a semiconductor, the energy band gap is less and there is a probability that electrons in the valence band can jump into the conduction band and start the conduction. In a conductor, there are always charges available because the valence band and the conduction bands are overlapped. Okay, so something about n-type and p-type materials. So before we actually go and try to understand what is n-type and what is p-type, let us consider the general case of an intrinsic semiconductor. Let's consider that silicon is being manufactured and is in its purest form. Okay, after all the manufacturing processes, let us consider that a silicon block has been fabricated and it is in its purest form. So when we say it is in its purest form, we apply the term intrinsic. So what does intrinsic mean? Intrinsic means that the number of electrons is equal to the number of holes in the case of an intrinsic semiconductor. Now the next question that comes to our mind is there any drawback with respect to an intrinsic semiconductor? Because we have already heard about another term called extrinsic. Yes, so intrinsic semiconductors, although they are in their purest form, they are not so good conductors because the number of free carriers available in an intrinsic semiconductor is not that large. So when we say it is not that large, we mean to say that the conductivity is not that large in the case of an intrinsic semiconductor. So how do we improvise? How do we improve the conductivity of a particular semiconductor? The conductivity of a particular semiconductor can be improvised, can be increased by doping it. Yes, so now we come across a new term called doping. Okay, so what do we mean by doping? In simple terms, doping means introducing some impurity atoms. Now whenever we say impurity atoms, these are good impurities. Okay, so these impurities are really good and they help in improvising, in enhancing the conductivity of a intrinsic semiconductor. Okay, so in short, whenever we introduce any impurities, we say that the semiconductor is doped. Now when we introduce N-type dopants, we say that the semiconductor becomes N-type. Okay, for example, there are some dopant atoms like, okay, before that, there are some very popular impurity materials that can be used to dope the semiconductors. Under normal circumstances, we can either go with pentavalent dopants or trivalent dopants. If we use pentavalent dopants like antimony, phosphorus, we get N-type of semiconductor. If we use trivalent impurities like boron, aluminum, we get P-type semiconductor. Well, whenever we dope any intrinsic material, it becomes extrinsic, and the main advantage of doping is it improves the conductivity of the overall material, of the overall semiconductor material. Okay, yes. So now let's very quickly look at this diagram, first diagram. Okay, so what is being done here? SB indicates antimony atom, so it is being introduced in the silicon crystal, which means it is being, the silicon crystal is being doped with N-type antimony atom. So you can very clearly see that antimony is a pentavalent atom, which means there are 5 electrons present in the outermost shell, out of which 4 electrons of antimony get involved in the bonding process. Okay, so this is the first one, second one, third one, and the fourth valence electron of antimony atom. So all these 4 electrons get involved in covalent bonding with respect to silicon atoms, whereas the fifth valence electron of antimony atom is left free. Okay, and it is left free in such a way that it can roam anywhere inside the silicon crystal. It is completely free, and this free electron is exactly what we need in order to improvise, enhance the conductivity of the particular silicon which is being doped. Okay, so this fifth valence electrons, it contributes a lot towards the conductivity. Similarly, let us look at the other scenario, okay, where the silicon is being doped by P-type impurities. So boron is a P-type impurity, which means its valency is 3. So there are 3 electrons in the outermost shell of boron atom. So B indicates boron atom, and it is clearly observed that 1, 2, 3. So these 3 valence electrons get involved in the bonding process. What about the other one? Well, so there is a vacancy which is being created now. Okay, so this vacancy is called as hole, right? So now a hole is a charge which is positive, unlike the case of electron which was negative. Okay, please understand that electrons are negatively charged and holes are positively charged. Okay. See, we usually cannot call a hole as free hole because this hole is actually a vacancy inside a crystal. Okay. A hole on itself cannot move. Then how do we say that a hole contributes towards the conductivity? Well, the point is, whenever there are any free electrons present within the crystal, or the electrons which are bounded in the bond, there is a probability that these electrons might jump into the vacancy. So whenever that happens, we say that there is a hole movement. Okay, so this is a very tricky condition and a very tricky concept which is usually confused. So I inform the students to just concentrate on the fundamentals and try to understand the concept of a hole movement. Okay, please understand, a hole is just a vacancy. It has positive charge and it resides within the crystal. It is not free. Okay, only when the adjacent electron or any free electron occupies that vacant position, we say that there is hole movement. Okay, fine. All right. So with the concept of this electron movement and the hole movement, which happens in the case of n-type and p-type materials, we will very quickly move towards the fundamentals of semiconductor theory. Okay, just a second. I think we just have one more point, okay, to be explained in the case of n-type and p-type semiconductors. You know, suppose if the semiconductor is intrinsic, we say that it is pure, and the number of free electrons will be equal to the number of holes always. So that is called as equilibrium condition. Fine. Now, suppose if the semiconductor is being doped with pentavalent atoms, it becomes n-type. Okay. And whenever any semiconductor is of n-type, the majority carriers in n-type semiconductor are electrons. Then what about holes? Will there be any holes or not? Yes, there will be some holes. Okay, also present in a n-type material. Why? Because the n-type material before doping was an intrinsic one, and in intrinsic case the number of electrons will be equal to number of holes. So there are always the holes. Now, when the semiconductor is being doped with pentavalent atoms, impurity atoms, it becomes n-type, and as I told you, in an n-type material, the majority carriers are electrons and the minority carriers are holes. Okay, so majority carrier current will be a lot greater or a lot larger when compared to minority carriers, which are the holes in the case of n-type material. Now what about p-type material? Well, in p-type material, the majority carriers are holes and the minority carriers are electrons. So the current in a p-type material is mainly due to holes. Okay, so just to summarize, n-type material, majority carriers electrons, minority carriers holes. P-type material, majority carriers are holes, minority carriers are electrons. Okay, yes. So I think we'll stop here. So this was the first session regarding the fundamentals. In the next session, we will be concentrating on the diode, okay, mainly the silicon diode. We'll try to understand all about a silicon diode and its characteristics. All right, okay. So thank you very much.